Have you ever witnessed a moment so brutally unfair, it makes your blood boil, only to see the universe deliver a plate of ice-cold karma seconds later? On a rainy Tuesday at JFK's Terminal 4, a veteran first-class flight attendant thought she could humiliate a quietly dressed black passenger just because he didn't fit her arrogant profile of wealth. She refused him service. She threatened to call security, but she had no idea who was walking down the jet bridge exactly 2 minutes later. The rain lashed against the massive glass windows of John F. Kennedy International Airport, distorting the bright neon lights of the tarmac into blurry streaks of yellow and blue. Inside the cabin of Apex Airlines, Flight 412, bound for London Heathrow, the atmosphere was a stark, meticulously engineered contrast to the storm outside. The first-class cabin was an oasis of ambient amber lighting, soft jazz, and the subtle scent of lavender and expensive leather. Standing at the front of this floating sanctuary was Chloe Harrington. Chloe, a lead purser, with 14 years of seniority under her belt, considered herself the undisputed queen of the sky. She possessed a flawless chignon, a sharply tailored navy blue uniform, and a smile that she could turn on and off with the mechanical precision of a light switch. Over the years, Chloe had developed a rigid, unyielding philosophy about air travel. First class was a sacred space. It was a sanctuary for the elite hedge fund managers, Hollywood royalty, and old money aristocrats. She prided herself on being the gatekeeper to this exclusive club, boasting an uncanny ability to spot new money, or worse, economy passengers trying to sneak a peek at the luxury they couldn't afford. As the boarding process commenced, Chloe greeted her regulars with sickening sweetness. "Mr. Henderson, so wonderful to see you again. Your usual gin and tonic before takeoff," she purred to a balding, portly man in a $3,000 suit. "Ah, Chloe, you always remember," he chuckled, settling into seat 1A. Chloe moved through the cabin with graceful arrogance, dispensing hot towels and crystal flutes of champagne. She thrived on the power dynamic, knowing these titans of industry relied on her for their comfort. Then the rhythm of her perfect boarding process was interrupted. Walking down the jet bridge and stepping into the pristine cabin was a man who, in Chloe's narrow mind, shattered the aesthetic of her domain. His name was David Miller. David was a black man in his late 30s, possessing a calm, observant demeanor. However, it wasn't his quiet confidence that caught Chloe's eye. It was his wardrobe. David was dressed for a red-eye flight, a plain, high-quality but unassuming grey hoodie, tailored black joggers, and a pair of clean white sneakers. He carried a worn leather duffel bag slung casually over one shoulder. He wore no flashy watch, no designer logos, nothing that broadcasted wealth. To Chloe, he looked like a walking red flag. As David stepped onto the plush carpet of the first-class galley, Chloe immediately stepped sideways, using her body to physically block his path to the left aisle. The mechanical smile vanished, replaced by a tight, patronizing line. "Excuse me, sir," Chloe said, her voice dripping with condescension. "I think you've made a wrong turn. The main cabin and economy sections are located straight down the right aisle and to the back." David paused. He didn't look angry, just mildly amused. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, tapping the screen to bring up his digital boarding pass. "I'm actually right here," David replied, his voice a rich, calm baritone. "Seat 2A. Chloe didn't bother to hide her skepticism. She snatched her digital scanner from her apron and held it out. "Let me see that. We've had a lot of glitches with the app lately, assigning people to the wrong cabins." David held out his phone. The scanner emitted a bright, cheerful beep, glowing green. The screen on Chloe's device clearly displayed Miller David. "Seat 2, a first class. Status Apex, Global Exclusive. Chloe stared at the screen, her jaw clenching. Apex Global Exclusive was the highest possible tier, an invitation-only status usually reserved for celebrities and board members. Her mind raced immediately, searching for a way to invalidate what she was seeing. He must be traveling on company points, she thought. Or maybe he works in IT and got a buddy pass. There is no way someone dressed like a teenager belongs in my cabin. Right, Chloe said, handing the phone back without a trace of an apology. Seat 2A is just behind Mr. Henderson. Please try not to bump the seats with your bag as you walk by. David offered a polite, close-mouthed smile, choosing to ignore the blatant microaggression. Thank you. He walked to his pod, effortlessly lifting his leather duffel into the overhead bin and settled into the wide, luxurious leather seat. He pulled out an iPad, adjusted his noise-cancelling headphones around his neck, and exhaled, preparing for the long flight across the Atlantic. He had just finished a grueling 3-day negotiation and was looking forward to nothing more than a quiet meal and 6 hours of uninterrupted sleep. But Chloe Harrington had other plans. In her mind, David was an intruder, a glitch in her perfect system, and she was determined to make sure he remembered his place. The boarding doors remained open as the final economy passengers trickled down the right aisle. In first class, the pre-flight ritual was in full swing. This was the window where flight attendants set the tone for the journey, offering premium beverages, hanging up coats, and distributing the heavy embossed menus. Chloe took a silver tray, loaded with flutes of vintage Laurent Perrier champagne and warmed porcelain bowls of macadamia nuts. She glided down the aisle. She stopped at 1A, chatting amiably with Mr. Henderson. She crossed the aisle to 1B, serving a wealthy socialite named Beatrice, complimenting the woman's diamond tennis bracelet. Then she stepped back to row 2. David looked up from his iPad, offering a polite smile, expecting to be offered a glass. Chloe's eyes met his for a fraction of a second. The smile dropped from her face. Deliberately smoothly, she pivoted on her heel, bypassing 2A entirely, and walked straight to seat 3A to serve a middle-aged tech executive. David frowned slightly. He watched as she served row 3, then row 4, until the silver tray was empty. He assumed it was a simple oversight. Perhaps she had run out of glasses and was going back to the galley to restock. 10 minutes passed. The junior flight attendant, a bright-eyed 20-something named Jessica, was busy in the opposite aisle. Chloe remained in the front galley, loudly discussing her upcoming vacation to Cabo with another crew member casually flipping through a magazine. David pressed the call button. A soft chime echoed through the cabin, and the light above 2A illuminated. Chloe sighed audibly in the galley. She took her time smoothing her apron before walking down the aisle. She didn't bring a menu. She didn't bring a drink. She simply stood at the edge of David's pod, her posture stiff, looking down her nose at him. "Yes," she asked. Not, "How can I help you, Mr. Miller?" Not, "What can I get for you?" Just a flat, irritated, "Yes." "Hi there," David said, maintaining his composure. "I think you might have missed me during the pre-flight service. Could I just get a glass of sparkling water with lemon, please? And I didn't receive a menu." Chloe crossed her arms over her chest. "Sir, the pre-flight service is a courtesy we offer while we have the time. I am currently busy preparing the cabin for departure. We will commence main service once we reach 10,000 feet. David looked around. Mr. Henderson was sipping his second gin and tonic. Beatrice was nibbling on warm nuts. Every other passenger in the cabin had a drink in their hand and a menu resting on their armrest. "I see," David said, his voice dropping slightly in temperature. "But every other passenger in this cabin was served. I'm just asking for a glass of water." Chloe leaned in slightly, her voice dropping to a harsh, hissing whisper. "Listen to me very carefully. I don't know whose miles you used to get this upgrade, or who you know at the ticket counter, but up here, I prioritize our paying premium clientele. I don't appreciate being summoned like a maid before we've even pushed back from the gate. You will get your water when I have a spare moment." David's eyes hardened. The casual, relaxed traveler faded, replaced by a sharp, calculating intensity. "Let me make sure I understand you," David said evenly. "You are refusing to serve me a glass of water because you have assumed based on my appearance that I didn't pay for this seat. I am telling you that I am busy," Chloe retorted, her face flushing with anger. She wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone she deemed beneath her. "Your name is Chloe, correct?" David asked, glancing at her silver name badge. "Chloe Harrington, lead purser," she said proudly, thrusting her chest out slightly. "And if you are going to be belligerent, I will have no problem calling the captain to have you removed from this aircraft. We have zero tolerance for aggressive passengers." The blatant weaponization of the word aggressive hung in the air. David hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't made a single threatening gesture. He was sitting perfectly still, his hands resting on his iPad. Yet Chloe was perfectly willing to play the victim, using deeply ingrained racial stereotypes to frame a calm black man asking for water as a physical threat. In seat 1, B. Beatrice turned around and scoffed loudly. Honestly, the entitlement of some people these days. If you can't behave, young man, you should go back to economy. David ignored the racist peanut gallery. He looked Chloe dead in the eyes. "I am perfectly calm, Chloe," David said, his voice carrying the quiet, dangerous weight of an avalanche about to break. "I am simply asking for the service I paid for. But since you have made your stance clear, I won't ask you for anything else." Chloe sneered triumphantly. "Smart decision. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have real VIPs to attend to." She spun around and marched back to the galley, feeling a surge of vindictive adrenaline. She had put him in his place. David watched her go. He didn't shout. He didn't demand to see the captain. Instead, he calmly opened a secure messaging app on his iPad, typed out a brief 3-line message, and hit send. The atmosphere in the first-class cabin was thick with an uncomfortable tension. Several passengers had witnessed the exchange, but true to the nature of extreme privilege, most chose to look the other way, burying their faces in the Wall Street Journal or turning up the volume on their noise-cancelling headphones. In the front galley, Jessica, the junior flight attendant, approached Chloe hesitantly. "Chloe, that guy in 2A, his status showed up as global exclusive," Jessica whispered, glancing nervously through the curtain. "Are you sure we shouldn't just get him a water? It takes 2 seconds." Chloe whipped around, her eyes flashing. "Don't you dare tell me how to do my job, Jessica. I've been flying since you were in middle school. I know exactly the type of person he is. He's a freeloader looking for a payday. He was aggressive and confrontational. In fact," Chloe grabbed the intercom phone, punching in the code for the gate agent's desk. "Gate 42. This is Marcus." A voice crackled over the line. "Marcus, this is Chloe Harrington on Flight 412. I need you to send security down the jet bridge. We have an unruly passenger in 2A. He's being belligerent, demanding things, and making the crew feel unsafe. I want him offloaded before we close the doors." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Chloe, are you sure the captain just gave us the order to hold the doors? We've got a massive ground delay." "What kind of delay?" Chloe demanded, tapping her foot impatiently. "The weather." "No," Marcus replied, his voice tense. "Corporate called down. We have an extreme VIP boarding at the absolute last minute. They said to hold the plane no matter what. He's 2 minutes out. I can't send security down there and cause a scene when a board-level VIP is walking down the bridge." Chloe's eyes widened, a thrill of excitement washing over her, entirely replacing her anger. A board-level VIP. This was her element. This was her chance to shine, to secure a glowing recommendation for her file. "Understood, Marcus," Chloe said smoothly. "I will handle the situation in 2A myself. Just get that VIP on board. Always." She slammed the phone down and turned to Jessica, her face flushed with frantic energy. "Forget 2A corporate VIP is boarding in 2 minutes. Get the Dom Perignon out of the reserve chiller. Polish a fresh glass. Make sure the welcome basket is perfect." Jessica scrambled to follow orders, while Chloe quickly checked her reflection in the galley mirror, applying a fresh coat of red lipstick and smoothing her hair. Back in the cabin, David sat quietly. He hadn't touched his iPad since sending the message. He simply stared out the window at the rain, his expression unreadable. Over the PA system, the captain's voice hummed to life. "Ladies and gentlemen from the flight deck, we apologize for the slight delay. We are currently holding the main cabin doors for one final late-arriving passenger. We should have them on board in just a couple of minutes, and then we'll be pushing back for London. Thank you for your patience." "Mr. Henderson groaned from 1A. "Unbelievable. Who do they think they are holding up the whole plane?" Beatrice chimed in. "Probably some reality TV star who thinks their time is more valuable than ours." Chloe stepped out of the galley, holding a silver tray with a pristine crystal glass and a chilled bottle of the airline's most expensive reserve champagne. She stood at the front of the cabin, practically vibrating with anticipation. She made a point to glare at David, a silent warning to behave himself while the true elite boarded. David slowly turned his head away from the window. He met Chloe's glare, and for the first time since he boarded, he smiled. It wasn't a polite smile. It was a cold, knowing smile. 1 minute. The sound of heavy, rapid footsteps echoed down the corrugated metal of the jet bridge. It wasn't just one person. It sounded like 3 or 4 people moving with extreme purpose. Chloe stood at attention, plastering her most radiant, subservient smile on her face. She practically leaned out of the aircraft door, ready to grovel. The heavy thud of leather dress shoes hit the aircraft threshold. Stepping into the plane, shaking off a wet umbrella, was an imposing man in his late 50s. He wore a sharp, charcoal grey bespoke suit. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed, though slightly damp from the rain. He possessed an aura of absolute, terrifying authority. It was Thomas Wright. Everyone in the aviation industry knew who Thomas Wright was. He was the legendary ruthless CEO and chairman of Apex Airlines, a man known for firing executives in the middle of board meetings and personally redesigning the airline's luxury tiers. Behind him stood the JFK station manager, looking pale and terrified, clutching a clipboard like a life preserver. Chloe's heart leaped into her throat. The CEO, the actual CEO, was on her flight. This was the pinnacle of her career. "Mr. Wright," Chloe beamed, bowing slightly, holding out the tray of champagne. "Welcome aboard, Flight 412. It is an absolute honor to have you with us. We've prepared the reserve vintage for you. Let me take your coat." Thomas Wright didn't even look at her. He didn't acknowledge the champagne. He moved past Chloe with the sheer physical force of a freight train, his eyes scanning the first-class cabin with laser precision. His eyes locked onto seat 2A. Thomas Wright's stern, terrifying face immediately melted into an expression of profound relief and respect. He practically rushed down the aisle, completely ignoring Beatrice and Mr. Henderson. He stopped right next to David Miller's pod. "David!" Thomas Wright gasped, slightly out of breath. He reached out, grabbing David's hand in a fierce, two-handed shake. "Thank God we caught you before pushback. I got your message." The entire first-class cabin went dead silent. The only sound was the hum of the aircraft engines and the rain on the roof. Chloe Harrington stood frozen in the galley, the bottle of Dom Perignon, suddenly feeling like a block of lead in her hands. The blood drained from her face, leaving her pale and trembling as she stared at the scene unfolding. David Miller, the man in the hoodie, the man she had just threatened to kick off the plane, casually squeezed the CEO's hand. "Hello, Thomas," David said smoothly. "I appreciate you coming down so quickly. I know it's a long drive from corporate." "Are you kidding me?" Thomas said, his voice booming through the quiet cabin. "When the new majority shareholder of Apex Airlines sends me a text saying he's being harassed on his own flagship route, I don't send an email. I come in person." The words, majority shareholder, dropped into the first-class cabin like a live grenade. The silence that followed was absolute suffocating and heavy with impending doom. The ambient jazz music playing softly from the overhead speakers suddenly felt mockingly cheerful. In seat 1, a Mr. Henderson, who had just been loudly complaining about the delay, choked on his gin and tonic, erupting into a violent fit of coughing. Beatrice, the wealthy socialite in 1B, went rigidly pale, her manicured hand flying to her throat as she stared at the man in the grey hoodie. In the front galley, Chloe Harrington felt the floor literally shift beneath her high-heeled shoes. The bottle of reserve Dom Perignon slipped an inch in her sweaty palms. Her brain, usually so quick to categorize and dismiss, simply short-circuited. Majority shareholder. David Miller wasn't a buddy pass rider. He wasn't an IT guy cashing in points. He was a managing director at Apollo Global Management, the monolithic private equity firm that had just 48 hours prior closed a multi-billion-dollar leveraged buyout of Apex Airlines. The ink on the SEC filings was barely dry. David had personally orchestrated the acquisition to save the airline from bankruptcy, restructuring its corporate debt, and stepping in as the new de facto head of the board. He was flying to London unannounced to audit the international operations team. Thomas Wright, a CEO, known for making grown executives cry in boardrooms, was currently treating David with the deference of a foot soldier addressing a 5-star general. "I apologize for dragging you out in the rain, Thomas," David said smoothly, his voice completely devoid of the panic that had infected the rest of the cabin. "But I felt it was important for you to see firsthand the operational culture we've just invested $3 billion into." Thomas swallowed hard, his face flushing with a mixture of embarrassment and rage. He turned around, his icy gaze sweeping over the cabin before locking onto the galley. "Chloe!" Thomas barked the name, cracking through the air like a whip. "Get out here, now!" Chloe's legs felt like lead, but years of muscle memory propelled her forward. She stepped out from behind the curtain, her immaculate posture crumbling. The mechanical smile was gone, replaced by a mask of sheer, unadulterated terror. She awkwardly placed the silver tray with the champagne onto the nearest empty counter, her hands shaking so violently the crystal flute rattled against the metal. Yes, Mr. Wright," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. Thomas Wright pointed a trembling finger at her. "Mr. Miller sent a direct encrypted message to my executive team stating that he was being denied basic service, racially profiled, and threatened with security removal by the lead purser on this aircraft. Explain yourself, now." Chloe's mind raced desperately, looking for a scapegoat, an excuse, an angle. She reverted to her default defense mechanism, playing the victim. "Mr. Right, sir, there has been a terrible misunderstanding," Chloe gasped, pressing her hands to her chest in a gesture of frantic innocence. "I was simply following protocol. The boarding process was incredibly chaotic, and Mr. Miller..." I was sitting quietly in my assigned seat. David interjected, his tone mild but lethal. I asked for a glass of water. He was aggressive. Chloe blurted out her voice, pitching up an octave into a shrill whine. She turned to the passengers, silently begging her elite regulars to back her up. He was demanding and disruptive, sir. I was terrified. I have a duty to protect the safety of the cabin, and I felt threatened. Ask anyone. Ask Mr. Henderson. Thomas Wright turned his imposing frame toward seat 1A. Is this true? Henderson did. Mr. Miller threatened this flight attendant? Mr. Henderson, suddenly realizing he was caught between his favorite bartender in the sky and a billionaire private equity titan who literally owned the plane, turned the color of old oatmeal. He furiously shook his head, refusing to make eye contact with Chloe. I didn't see anything, Thomas. I was reading my paper. I don't know anything about it. Beatrice suddenly found the stitching on her Prada handbag absolutely fascinating, completely ignoring Chloe's pleading gaze. I didn't threaten you, Chloe, David said, his voice dropping to a register of absolute, terrifying calm. I asked for a glass of water. You told me you prioritized paying premium clientele. You assumed, based entirely on my race and my clothing, that I didn't belong in this cabin. And when I calmly pointed out your refusal to serve me, you weaponized the word aggressive and threatened to call security to have me dragged off this aircraft. David slowly stood up from his pod. He was tall, well over 6 feet, and though he wore a simple hoodie, his presence dominated the space completely. Do you know why I wear this when I fly, Chloe? David asked softly. Because I spend 80 hours a week in a bespoke suit, dictating the financial futures of Fortune 500 companies. When I get on a plane, I want to be comfortable. But more importantly, I want to see how a company truly treats its customers when they think nobody important is watching. Chloe burst into tears, realizing her lies were completely disintegrating. So please, I've been with Apex for 14 years. I have an impeccable record. I was just stressed. We had a ground delay. That's a lie. A small, shaky voice echoed from the galley. Everyone turned. Jessica, the junior flight attendant, stepped out from behind the curtain. She looked terrified, her hands clutching her apron, but she stood her ground, looking directly at the CEO. Jessica, what are you doing? Chloe hissed venomously. Get back to the galley. No, Jessica said, her voice gaining strength. Mr. Wright, she's lying. Mr. Miller wasn't aggressive at all. He just asked for water. Chloe deliberately skipped his row during service. And when she came back to the galley, she said he was a freeloader looking for a payday. She called the gate desk and tried to have security rip him off the plane before the doors closed. She only stopped because the desk told her a VIP was boarding. Thomas Wright's face turned a dangerous shade of crimson. The vein in his forehead throbbed visibly. He turned back to Chloe, who was now openly sobbing, her perfect chignon coming undone strands of hair sticking to her wet face. 14 years, Thomas said, his voice a low, gravelly growl. 14 years you've represented this airline. And the moment you think you can get away with it, you treat a passenger, any passenger, let alone the man who just saved our pensions, like garbage, because of your own arrogant, bigoted assumptions. Please, Mr. Wright, I'll apologize. I'm so sorry, Mr. Miller. I didn't know who you were, Chloe pleaded, reaching a hand out toward David. David didn't flinch. He looked at her with profound pity and disgust. That is exactly the problem, Chloe. You are only apologizing because of who I am. If I had been anyone else, a teacher, a construction worker, a father flying to see his kids, you would have had security drag me out of here in handcuffs just to feed your own ego. You aren't sorry for what you did. You're sorry you did it to the owner. Thomas Wright stepped forward, invading Chloe's personal space. Chloe Harrington, Thomas said, his voice echoing coldly off the curved walls of the fuselage. "You are terminated, effective immediately, for gross misconduct, racial discrimination, and violating the core values of Apex Airlines." The finality of the word terminated hung in the air, absolute and irrevocable. Chloe's knees buckled, and she grabbed the edge of the bulkhead to steady herself. "No," she gasped, her makeup running down her face in dark, ugly streaks. "You can't do this. I have seniority. I have a union representative. You can't just fire me on a plane." "Watch me," Thomas Wright snarled. "Your union representative can review the security footage of you deliberately bypassing a passenger, and they can listen to the sworn testimony of your junior crew member and the CEO of the company. Hand over your wings and your company ID right now." The JFK station manager, who had been hovering nervously behind Thomas this entire time, finally stepped forward. He produced a small plastic evidence bag. "Chloe," the manager said, quietly, avoiding her eyes. "Please, just give me the badge. Don't make this any worse than it already is." Sobbing hysterically, stripped of all the haughty arrogance she had wielded just 10 minutes prior, Chloe reached up with trembling hands. She unpinned the gold Apex Airlines wings from her lapel. The metal clinked as she dropped it into the plastic bag. Next, she unclipped her security badge and handed it over. "Get your bags," Thomas ordered. "You are being escorted off the premises." Chloe turned to the front closet, dragging out her pristine, monogrammed roller bag. She looked back at the first-class cabin one last time. She looked at Mr. Henderson, who was deeply engrossed in a magazine he was holding upside down. She looked at Beatrice, who was actively staring out the window into the pitch-black rain. The elite club she had so desperately tried to gatekeep had instantly abandoned her the moment her power was stripped away. As Chloe began the long, agonizing walk up the jet bridge, she realized the worst part of her humiliation was yet to come. The ground delay had caused a backlog. The jet bridge was still lined with late-boarding economy passengers, the very people she openly despised waiting for clearance to step onto the aircraft. They parted like the Red Sea, as Chloe, sobbing uncontrollably, mascara smudged to her chin, was marched past them by the station manager. Whispers erupted immediately, cell phone cameras discreetly angled toward her. The Queen of the Sky was being dethroned in front of the peasants. Back on Flight 412, the heavy aircraft door was finally pulled shut and locked into place. Thomas Wright took a deep breath, smoothing his suit jacket, before turning back to David Miller. "David, I cannot express how profoundly sorry I am," Thomas said, his tone completely shifting back to respectful deference. "This is a systemic failure, and I assure you it will be addressed at the highest corporate level tomorrow morning." "I know it will." "Thomas," David replied calmly, sitting back down in his pod. "That's why I bought the company." Thomas offered a tight nod, understanding the unspoken mandate. He then turned his attention to the young flight attendant, standing awkwardly in the galley. "Jessica, is it?" Thomas asked. Yes, sir." Jessica stammered, her eyes wide. "You showed exceptional integrity today," the CEO said. "Standing up to a senior purser takes courage. Effective immediately, you are promoted to lead purser for this flight. When you land in London, my office will be contacting you. We are revamping our corporate executive fleet, and we need crew members who actually understand hospitality and basic human decency. Expect a significant pay bump." Jessica gasped, tears welling in her own eyes this time, out of pure shock and gratitude. "Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Wright." Thomas Wright nodded, shook David's hand one last time, and stepped off the plane just before the doors were sealed. The heavy thud of the cabin doors locking signaled a permanent shift in the atmosphere. The tension slowly began to bleed out of the room. The captain's voice came over the intercom, cleared for pushback. As the massive Boeing 777 began to slowly roll backward, away from the gate, Jessica approached. Seat 2A. She carried a silver tray with a single perfectly polished crystal glass of sparkling water, garnished with a fresh slice of lemon. "Mr. Miller," Jessica said softly, offering a warm, genuine smile. "Your water, sir, and a menu for tonight's flight." David took the glass, returning the smile. "Thank you, Jessica. Congratulations on the promotion. It's well deserved." As Jessica walked away to begin preparing the cabin for takeoff, David took a sip of the water. He opened his iPad, closed his messaging app, and pulled up a sprawling spreadsheet detailing Apex Airlines' operational budget. From the row ahead, Mr. Henderson timidly peered over the top of his pod. "Excuse me, Mr. Miller." Henderson squeaked, his voice laced with desperate sycophancy. "I just wanted to say, I thought her behavior was absolutely appalling. Disgusting, really. If you ever need a character witness, I'm at your disposal. I run a hedge fund out of—" David didn't even look up from his screen. He simply reached up with one hand, grabbed the edge of his noise-cancelling headphones, and slid them over his ears, plunging the desperate pandering of the elite back into absolute glorious silence. At 35,000 feet, over the pitch-black Atlantic Ocean Flight 412 was finally living up to its reputation as a sanctuary. With Chloe removed from the environment, the oppressive judgmental atmosphere in the first-class cabin had completely evaporated. Jessica thrust into the role of lead purser, with zero warning was executing her duties with a warmth and meticulous precision that Chloe hadn't demonstrated in a decade. There was no arrogance in Jessica's service, only genuine hospitality. When it was time for the main dinner service, Jessica approached David's pod. She had swapped out the standard dinnerware for the reserve porcelain, usually kept under lock and key for heads of state. "Mr. Miller, for the main course this evening, we have the seared Chilean sea bass with a saffron risotto, or the braised short rib," Jessica said softly, presenting the tray. David removed his noise-cancelling headphones, offering a genuine smile. "The sea bass sounds excellent, Jessica, and please call me David. We're going to be working closely together in the near future." Jessica blushed slightly, a mixture of pride and lingering shock coloring her cheeks. "Of course, David. I'll have that right out for you." As he ate, David didn't watch a movie or sleep. He kept his iPad illuminated, his fingers moving rapidly over the screen. He wasn't just enjoying a meal, he was performing a forensic audit of the in-flight experience. He noted the quality of the plating, the lag time in the Wi-Fi connection, and the ambient temperature of the cabin. But most importantly, he noted the stark difference in crew morale. The junior flight attendants, previously terrified of Chloe's tyrannical rule, were now moving through the aisles with relaxed shoulders and natural smiles. David realized that Chloe Harrington wasn't just a single bad apple. She was a symptom of a rotting corporate culture that prioritized the illusion of exclusivity over basic human dignity. And he was going to burn that culture to the ground. 3,000 miles behind them, on the ground in New York, Chloe Harrington's reality was rapidly disintegrating. She was sitting in the back of a battered yellow taxi, stuck in gridlock traffic on the Van Wyck Expressway. The heavy rain pounded against the roof of the cab, mirroring the relentless pounding in her skull. Her designer uniform was damp, her hair was a tangled mess, and her phone was shaking violently in her hands. She dialed the number for Richard Gallagher, the senior representative for the Flight Attendants Union. Richard was a ruthless bulldog of a negotiator, a man who had successfully defended crew members against everything from theft to intoxication on the job. If anyone could save her, it was Richard. The phone rang 4 times before a gruff voice answered. "Gallagher!" "Richard! Oh, thank God!" Chloe sobbed, leaning forward in the cab. "Richard, it's Chloe. Chloe Harrington. You have to help me. I've just been illegally terminated by Thomas Wright. On the plane right, in front of the passengers. There was a long, heavy sigh on the other end of the line. The sound of shuffling papers echoed through the receiver. Chloe, Richard said, his tone devoid of its usual aggressive energy. It sounded cold, clinical. Where are you right now? I'm in a cab heading home. Richard, you have to file a grievance immediately. I was verbally assaulted by a passenger. This man, he looked like a thug. He snuck into first class and started demanding things. I felt threatened. I was just following safety protocols. And then Thomas Wright showed up and fired me without cause. It's wrongful termination. Stop talking, Chloe. Richard snapped, his voice cracking like a whip. Just stop. Save the victim routine. It's over. Chloe froze, her breath catching in her throat. What do you mean it's over? I pay union dues. You have to represent me. I represent members who are subjected to unfair labor practices, Richard said, his voice dropping to a low, furious rumble. I do not represent liabilities. Do you have any idea what you just did? Do you even know who was sitting in seat 2AA? He was just some guy in a hoodie, a freeloader. That freeloader is David Miller, Richard spat, managing director of Apollo Global Management, the man who just bought Apex Airlines for $3 billion. The ink is still wet on the SEC filings, Chloe. He is the new majority shareholder. Chloe felt all the air leave her lungs. The cab suddenly felt impossibly small, the air thick and suffocating. But that's not even the worst part, Richard continued mercilessly. Thomas Wright didn't just fire you. He went straight back to corporate and pulled the audio recordings from the galley and the gate desk. He has you on tape, Chloe. He has you calling the gate, trying to weaponize airport security against a black man who was sitting quietly in his assigned seat, purely because you didn't like his outfit. He has the sworn testimony of your junior crew member. Jessica is a liar. She's gunning for my job, Chloe screamed desperately. Jessica was just promoted to lead purser of the executive fleet, Richard countered. And as of 10 minutes ago, the legal team at Apex sent a memo to the union board. They are classifying your termination under gross misconduct and civil rights violations. Do you understand what that means? The collective bargaining agreement doesn't protect you from hate speech or racial profiling. If the union tries to fight this, Apollo Global Management will tie us up in litigation for the next decade and bankrupt our pension fund. Richard, please, Chloe begged, the tears flowing freely, now hot and humiliating. I'll lose my pension. I'll lose my travel privileges. I have a mortgage. You should have thought about your mortgage before you tried to play God in the first-class cabin, Richard said coldly. You're toxic waste, Chloe. The union is officially declining to represent you. Do not call this number again. Have your lawyer contact corporate if you want to fight it, but I suggest you just disappear quietly. Goodbye. The line went dead. Chloe stared at the screen of her phone. The words, "Call ended," glowing in the dark cab. She dropped the phone onto the cracked leather seat, buried her face in her hands, and screamed. It was a guttural, wretched sound, drowned out only by the relentless New York rain. Her kingdom was gone. Her career was ash. And the terrifying truth settled into her bones. She had done this entirely to herself. 7 hours later, the grey, overcast skies of London greeted Flight 412 as it touched down on the tarmac at Heathrow Airport. David Miller stepped off the aircraft feeling refreshed and sharply focused. He bypassed the standard customs line, escorted by a private concierge, directly to a waiting black Bentley Bentayga on the tarmac. As the luxury SUV wove through the bustling airport traffic toward central London, David reviewed the dossier his team had compiled overnight. The incident with Chloe Harrington was not an isolated event. David's private equity firm hadn't just bought Apex Airlines for its fleet. They bought it because the company's stock was severely undervalued due to years of abysmal customer satisfaction ratings. As David dug into the internal metrics, a disturbing pattern emerged, particularly in the European division. There was a systemic culture of elitism fostered by the upper management that actively encouraged staff to profile passengers. The man responsible for overseeing this toxic culture was William Lancaster, the executive vice president of European operations. William was old money, a man who wore tweed suits, smoked cigars in his office, and treated the airline like his own private country club. He was the one who had written the internal memos encouraging gate agents to scrutinize upgrades given to passengers who didn't fit the traditional Apex demographic. He was the architect of the exact mindset that had empowered Chloe Harrington. An hour later, David walked through the glass doors of the Apex Airlines European headquarters in Canary Wharf. He was still wearing his grey hoodie, black joggers and sneakers. The receptionist, a haughty woman in a designer silk scarf, looked him up and down with immediate disdain. "Can I help you? The courier entrance is around the back." David didn't blink. "I'm here for the 10 o'clock executive board meeting, boardroom A." The receptionist scoffed. "I assure you, sir, that meeting is strictly for senior executives. You must be lost." Before David could reply, the glass doors to the suite swung open, and Thomas Wright, who had flown in on the company's private Gulfstream just hours before, strode into the lobby. "David!" Thomas called out, ignoring the receptionist entirely. "They're all waiting for you inside. The entire regional executive team is present." The receptionist's jaw dropped, her face draining of color, as she realized she had just directed the new owner of the company to the delivery entrance. David simply offered her a polite nod and walked past her, trailing Thomas down the mahogany-paneled hallway. They pushed open the heavy oak doors to boardroom A. Inside, 12 executives in bespoke suits sat around a massive glass table. At the head of the table sat William Lancaster, looking incredibly bored as he swirled a cup of Earl Grey tea. When David walked in, dressed in his casual travel clothes, several executives exchanged confused, mocking glances. William Lancaster offered a patronizing smile. "Ah, Thomas," William drawled, not bothering to stand up. "And this must be Mr. Miller from the private equity firm. Welcome to London, old boy. Forgive us if we're a bit overdressed. We didn't realize it was Casual Friday." A few sycophantic chuckles rippled around the table. David didn't laugh. He walked slowly to the opposite end of the table, pulling out the chair directly facing William. He placed his iPad on the glass, tapped the screen, and connected it to the massive projector on the wall. "Good morning, everyone," David said, his voice calm, carrying that same dangerous weight it had on the airplane. "Let's skip the pleasantries. As of yesterday, Apollo Global Management is the majority owner of Apex Airlines, which means I am your new boss." The chuckles instantly died. The room grew deathly quiet. "We bought this airline because it is failing," David continued, pacing slowly behind his chair. "Your profit margins are bleeding out. Your customer retention is in the gutter, and frankly, your brand reputation is a joke. Last night on my flight over here, I experienced exactly why." David tapped his iPad. The projector illuminated, displaying a high-resolution photograph of Chloe Harrington. "This was my lead purser," David said. "She refused to serve me, racially profiled me, and attempted to have me removed by security because I was wearing this hoodie. She assumed I didn't belong in first class. She was terminated on the spot." William Lancaster waved a dismissive hand, looking entirely unbothered. "Yes, well, Thomas briefed me on this unfortunate little HR hiccup this morning. It's a shame, really. Chloe was one of our best. A bit overzealous, perhaps, but she fiercely protected the brand. We'll issue a standard apology, sweep it under the rug, and move on. No need to overreact, Mr. Miller. David stared at William, his eyes narrowing into cold, predatory slits. Overzealous. She was blatantly racist, William. Oh, let's not use such ugly words. William sighed, leaning back in his chair. Our premium passengers pay a premium price for exclusivity. They want to be surrounded by their peers. Chloe simply made a visual judgment call to protect the sanctuary of the cabin. It's exactly the kind of vigilance I train into my staff. David smiled. It was the exact same smile he had given Chloe just before her world collapsed. I'm glad you admitted that on the record, William, David said softly. He tapped his iPad again. The picture of Chloe vanished, replaced by a series of internal emails. The font was blown up to massive proportions, highlighting William Lancaster's digital signature. David read from the screen, his voice echoing in the silent boardroom. Memo to all station managers. Ensure gate agents are strictly vetting all complimentary upgrades. We must maintain the aesthetic standard of the Apex brand. Do not hesitate to deny boarding to individuals who fail to reflect the socio-economic pedigree of our target demographic. William's smug expression finally cracked. He sat up straight, his face turning a blotchy red. Those are internal communications. You have no right to contextualize them that way. It's standard brand protection. It's systemic discrimination. David fired back, his voice, rising in volume, dominating the room. You engineered a culture that told your employees it was acceptable to judge, demean, and humiliate paying customers based on their appearance and race. You empowered people like Chloe Harrington to act like tyrants. You didn't protect the brand, William. You poisoned it. David pressed a final button on his iPad. A PDF document appeared on the screen. It was a termination notice pre-signed by David Miller and Thomas Wright. William Lancaster. David said, the finality in his voice absolute. You are terminated effective immediately, without severance. Your access to the building has already been revoked. Security is waiting outside the door to escort you to the street. The boardroom erupted into stunned, chaotic murmurs. William Lancaster, a man who had reigned over the European division for 20 years, stood up, trembling with rage and humiliation. You can't do this. William sputtered, his aristocratic composure entirely shattered. I built this division. You're just a number cruncher. You know nothing about aviation. I know that arrogance bankrupts companies, David replied coldly. And I know I don't want you anywhere near mine. Get out. 2 burly security guards stepped into the boardroom, flanking the disgraced executive. William looked around the table silently, begging his loyalists for support. But just like the passengers in first class, the executives suddenly found the mahogany table extremely fascinating, refusing to meet his eye. William was escorted out, his protests echoing down the hallway until the heavy doors clicked shut. David turned his attention back to the terrified remaining executives. Let me be crystal clear, David said, his voice dropping back to a terrifyingly calm register. The era of the Apex Country Club is dead. From this moment forward, we are a hospitality company. We treat every single passenger from seat 1A to seat 54J with absolute dignity and respect. If you disagree with this philosophy, I suggest you leave your badges on the table and walk out right now. Because if I catch a hint of the elitist garbage that William was peddling, I won't just fire you. I will make sure you never work in this industry again. No one moved. No one breathed. The corporate cleansing had begun. 6 months later, The brutal restructuring of Apex Airlines made the cover of the Wall Street Journal. Under David Miller's relentless oversight, the company completely overhauled its training programs, implemented strict zero-tolerance policies for discrimination, and revamped its entire customer service ethos. The stock price skyrocketed by 40%. Jessica, the junior flight attendant who had stood her ground, was now the chief purser of the corporate executive fleet. She flew exclusively on the private Gulfstreams, traveling the world, earning a six-figure salary, and personally overseeing the training of new senior crew members. And as for Chloe Harrington, her attempt to spin her firing into a viral victim narrative on social media had backfired spectacularly. Sarah Jenkins, David's ruthless head of PR, had cleanly countered Chloe's tearful TikTok videos by releasing a heavily redacted, legally bulletproof statement outlining the gross violation of civil rights and passenger safety that led to her dismissal. The internet, armed with context, turned on Chloe with vicious speed. She was universally blacklisted by every major commercial airline, private charter company, and hospitality group in the country. It was a freezing, sleet-filled morning in November at a dilapidated regional bus terminal in upstate New York. The air smelled of diesel fumes and stale coffee. Chloe Harrington, wearing a cheap, ill-fitting polyester uniform vest, stood by the door of a Greyhound bus. Her flawless chignon was gone, replaced by a messy ponytail. Her face looked worn, the arrogant spark in her eyes entirely extinguished by months of rejection, unpaid bills, and crushing humiliation. She held a metal hole puncher in her freezing gloveless hands. A line of weary, diverse travelers shuffled past her, handing her their crumpled paper tickets. Next, Chloe mumbled, her voice flat and lifeless. A young black man wearing a grey hoodie and carrying a worn backpack handed her his ticket. He offered her a polite, warm smile. "Morning. Terrible weather we're having, right?" the young man said kindly. Chloe looked at the hoodie. She looked at his face. A phantom memory of a first-class cabin of a crystal glass and of a man named David Miller flashed violently through her mind. The ghost of her own ego haunted her, a constant reminder of the kingdom she had thrown away for absolutely nothing. Chloe swallowed hard, forcing a tight, broken smile. "Yes, sir," she whispered, punching his ticket with trembling hands. "Have a safe trip. Go right on board." Kihor, she watched him walk away, finally understanding the hardest lesson of all. Karma doesn't always scream. Sometimes it just takes away everything you thought you were and leaves you exactly where you belong. What a satisfying end to a story about arrogance. Meeting its match, Chloe thought her uniform gave her the right to judge a book by its cover. But David proved that true power doesn't need to shout it, just needs the right moment to strike. It's a brutal reminder that basic human decency should never be a luxury upgrade. Did Chloe get exactly what she deserved, or was her punishment too harsh? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. If you loved this story of instant karma, make sure to hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe for more real-life drama.